I just wanted to say welcome and thank you for being with us. We're really, really excited about this evening, and I am really thrilled to welcome and share with everybody who's here. And to me, this is a very exciting evening. Hearing different voices around Mikveh, Taharat, Hamishpacha, and marriage, seeing women who are participating from all over the world. And the Eden Center conceived and decided to co-sponsor this event because we felt that it's really a time when people are sort of looking for inspiration and connection. And so many people are re-examining their relationship with mikveh in light of Corona. I've heard a lot of discussions about the safety of mikveh, which we've definitely tried to contribute to positively in terms of both the conversation of providing resources for you as women, but also guiding mikveh attendants. But I've also heard from a lot of women who were sort of reconsidering and asking themselves generally, how do I feel about going to the mikveh? And at a time when so many of us, so many people were reassessing their feelings about if and how we go, I thought that was really, everybody who's involved in the program thought it was the perfect time, the perfect opportunity to bring together different voices to help think about these topics. So I hope that this will enrich your discussion around Mikveh, Taharat, Hamishpacha, and marriage. For any of you who don't know me, I'm Naomi Marman-Grummet. I'm the director and founder of the Eden Center. And as I said before, it really is a pleasure to see so many faces. The Eden Center, I felt, was uniquely positioned to address this issue because that's what Eden's work really has always been, is, and will always be about: strengthening women's relationship to mikveh, improving the experience of mikveh for every single woman who wants to come, and giving voice to the different aspects, be it our physical, our emotional, our spiritual health, the discussion about intimacy. And we do that through programs, resources, enrichment of different kinds. And tonight's program is just one example of that. We have so many ways in which we address these topics, from the recent webinars that we did on intimacy through different life stages, to printed resources for mikveh, for women going through loss or infertility, a weekly podcast of women's wisdom and wellness, our Chatan and Kala teacher training courses, which have now gone online, which gives people all over the opportunity to participate. And we're best known for our mikveh attendant training courses with an emphasis on sensitivity, women's health and well-being. And we are actually about to launch that online too, which is very interesting. And it's very exciting to see all of your faces, but I'd love to keep you in the loop and have you participate and support our work. And most importantly, stay connected. So if you aren't already on, please join our mailing list. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram, and be part of creating future programming. It was really a few women who came to me and said, what do you think about doing this? That brought this evening to fruition, and we're really thankful for that. We're always coming up with new ideas, and we're always open to hearing new ideas from you. And actually, while Corona made it seem like there were so many new questions, actually the question of how do I feel about mikveh, how do I connect to mikveh, what does it mean to me, how do I make sense of it, that's actually an age-old question. And the women's community that is formed around mikveh, women helping women, women speaking to women, is something that transcends this one time. The women's community is something that we need to cultivate, and we need to create that community and tap into it. But we all have to add our voices, make mikveh relevant, recognize and discuss the struggles, and that's really what we're here to do tonight. So I want to thank all of you. Thank you for participating, and thank you to all of our speakers, whom I'm really excited to hear. And I want to give a quick shout out to Even-chen and Shuli Haston, who coordinated this program, and to 3 other amazing volunteers who are right now on the back end helping us with all the technical things: Ayala Manis, Esther Kelman, and Rochelle Cohen. And I especially want to thank our incredible moderator, Rachel Herkman, who's going to tie it all together for us. And this kind of programming and all the work that the Eden Center does, we can really only continue to do because of the support of people like every single one of you who are here. We really need your partnership. And I'd love to continue to be in touch with all of you I would love for you to get involved in doing something. And during the Zoom, I will put some links or have somebody put some links into the chat for how you can connect. So with no further ado, because I don't want to take away from the amazing speakers who are here, I'm going to hand it over to Rachel. By way of introduction, Rachel Herkman is a psychotherapist who specializes in relationships and sexual health. She's a professional trainer and a clinical director of the Layers Project. And she is the American representative for this conversation. Everybody except for Tal's in Italy, but everybody else is in Israel, and they are our voice from beyond these walls. So, Rachel, bakasha.
Can everyone hear me? That's always the greeting now, right? Before we even say hello to people, we ask if they can hear us. So hello everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in today, tonight, wherever you may be, joining us at our really amazing program. And there's something really, really amazing about women coming together and having a conversation and listening and hearing different voices and different perspectives. And as soon as I heard the concept of this program, it just sounded so natural. Like, of course we need to have this conversation. And of course we have to continue having these conversations and always be looking to open new conversations. Now, if you were to make up a bingo board listing every loaded topic that comes up for women, Mikveh would hit every single box because it encompasses so much about who we are and so much about our lives. The Mikveh and Taharat Hamishpacha and so many related concepts have us thinking about so many questions, as Naomi alluded to, right? Really thinking about these things. How do you feel about your body? How do you feel about your relationships? How do you feel about sex? How do you feel about your life? How do you feel about the passage of time? How do you feel about God? Right? There's so many things that get opened up in these conversations. And there's often for many women shifts and fluctuations over time with these topics, depending on things going on in their lives, life cycle events, different circumstances. And this pandemic that we've been in, I'm in New York, so this is still something that's a reality. I feel like Israel can kind of write the manual to teach other places how to deal with it. And this pandemic has created new issues and new dynamics, but it has also amplified old issues and old dynamics. And it certainly has highlighted for many people the questions of how they feel, and which is why it's so helpful and so nourishing when we can have these conversations. Now, the voices that we're hearing tonight are 7 voices, 7 awesome voices, and there are thousands of other voices out there, millions, because these topics are so unique to every single woman and how she feels and how she may feel at a given time. There are things you might hear tonight that really hit home. There are things that you might hear tonight that don't resonate as much. Just know that, as Naomi said, we are always open to having conversations. So if you think of an idea of a topic that's, let's say, not touched on tonight, or you wish it would be touched on even more, feel free to reach out and help create that conversation. So with that, I'm truly, truly honored to introduce our first guest. Mrs. Yael Leibowitz is a celebrated Tanakh and Jewish biblical thought lecturer. She currently teaches primarily in institutions of advanced Torah learning for women, and Yael will be discussing the archetype of water in Tanakh. Take it away.
All right. I think they have to unmute me. There you go. Hi, everyone. I can't even see who's on, but if there's anyone on, I know. Hi, thank you for coming. So when Naomi called, when the Eden Center reached out about being involved in this project, I was still, as Rachel said, a couple of weeks ago, we were still in Israel, knee deep in quarantine and in Corona. And so the experience really got me thinking when they mentioned the topic was going to be about Taharat Hamishpacha. So the experience of Corona and being quarantined at home got me thinking about the system of ritual purity in Tanakh wholesale. And I say system because I think in Tanakh, we have sort of the micro and the macro, right? We have the micro, which is the nitty gritty, the halachot, the practical rules and the applications of those halachot. But if we take a step back, what we realize is that each halachic system itself also has cultural implications, that each system cultivates a certain mindset, a certain worldview, right? And I think this holds true for all of the various halachic systems, for the dietary laws, for arayot. Just this past Shabbat, we were reading about Shemitah and Yovel, right? And it's not just about when you can work the lands and when you can't and when you can farm, but Shemitah and Yovel shapes how we see our relationship to the land, how we redefine concepts of ownership. And I think that when we talk about Taharat Hamishpacha, when we focus primarily really on our relationship with our spouses, because that time of impurity most directly affects that one relationship, the relationship with our husband. But I think that for the most part, because the laws of Taharat, of Tumah and Tahara, of ritual purity, in the absence of a Beit HaMikdash, are no longer as relevant today as they were in temple times. We've actually lost touch with a big piece of what the system at large is meant to evoke in us as individuals, as a community. And I think Corona sort of brought a lot of that up for me personally. If you look in your sources in Bamidbar Parakeh, the first sources on your sheets, it really sums up in Pasuk Bet, right there in Parakeh and Bamidbar, what I believe the ritual system, the ritual purity system is about. It says, Tzav et b'nei Yisrael, v'yishalchu mina machaneh kol tzarua v'chol zav v'chol tameh lenefesh, mizachar ad nekeva tishalechu, el michutz lamachaneh tishalchum. So it lists all the different types of people who become ritually impure through body emissions, through contact with the dead. And the reason we remove them from the camp is v'lo yitam'u et machanehem asher ani shochen b'tocham. You could stop sharing the screen. And the reason we remove them is because we can't allow them to defile the camp that God himself dwells in. And so if we look carefully, really there's an obligation on some level with that we're talking about within the system, not just to maintain ritual purity for ourselves, but on some level, the system really was about maintaining the wholesale purity of the community. Because as the Pasuk says, ritual purity is a prerequisite to approaching God. Hashem says, V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, God will dwell among us. But if we want to experience that immanence in our midst, then we need to ensure the purity of the camp. In the desert, it was the camp, and then once the Beit HaMikdash was built, then the same holds true for the Mikdash. And so ritual impurity, if you think about it, what's really interesting is that there's nothing sinful about it, right? I don't have to tell anyone on this group that having your period and being tumat nida is not sinful. But really no ritual impurity is sinful, not tumat zav, not tumat nida. In fact, sometimes or oftentimes there are many mitzvot that actually necessitate that we become ritually impure, right? Having children, burying the dead. The ritual impurity really only comes in contact with sin when a person fails to purify, when they need to, and when they defile the camp. And it's fascinating, really, if you think about it, because a lot of ritual impurities we could keep a secret, right? Someone has an emission, don't tell anyone about it. You have Taharat, so pull your sleeve down and cover the eczema. The system demands, really, implicitly, that the onus falls on the individual to recognize that he, or I'll speak she, is part of a community, is part of a whole, and to think about how the status of his or her body directly affects the aggregate purity of the entire community. And I think there's something really, really interesting about that. Just as a side note, the punishment for someone who isn't mitaher themselves after their tameh and they do defile the camp is karet, right? They're cut off from the community. And it seems harsh, but if you think about it, it's really almost an organic extension of what that person already chose. They chose to sort of flout their responsibility that they have towards preservation of the purity of the community. And so they're cut off. It's almost it sort of ratifies the decision that they already made. So I think that the system itself cultivates a sense of responsibility of the individual towards the community, and a sense that you'll see in a second, I think we're removed from in modern times, that the decisions that a person makes for himself or herself directly affect the entirety of the community. And that system, sort of the system of ritual purity, inculcated that into the mindset of people through the way that the laws were enacted and through the ways that they were carried out. And really ritual purity had sort of its home. It was sort of spiritually suited for the ancient world where we existed with subsistence living and extended households, and there really was no concept of the individual. But modern living, for better or for worse, because I think, right? All historical evolutions have their pros and cons, but modern living has created to a degree and perpetuated the illusion that we exist as individuals, right? That there's such a thing almost as an existential vacuum, right? So yes, we help people, and yes, we give tzedakah and we try to do chesed, but I think on some level that raw, visceral understanding that the choices we make directly affect the people around us or directly affect the nature of the community is a concept that was so natural to Jews that were bound by the full purity system that's been lost in many ways in modern times. And then Naomi calls, and all of a sudden she calls during a time where we're told that if we cough in a store or if our kids are asymptomatic carriers of this virus, it can spread invisibly and it could have disastrous consequences. And I think that for the first time, we've come back really to thinking of our bodies as extensions of the larger communal body. And the consciousness that was gradually worn away in recent centuries has started to seep back into our decision making and to what we think about when we decide how we are going to behave and how that's going to affect the people around us. And I think that there's something very unique in the ability of this pandemic, shockingly, sort of to give us a glimpse into that facet of Taharat and what Taharat is really all about. The flip side, and this was sort of also what I was sort of deciding which one to speak about, and then I decided to speak about both. The flip side, it's almost sort of the ironic, maybe binary almost to the thought I just mentioned, is that I think on some level as conceptually aware we've become of sort of that which exists outside of us, physically we've become very isolated. And that isolation for many of us has created a scenario where the noise and the static and the things that normally monopolize our attention and our consciousness really are suddenly quiet or even irrelevant. And I think we're forced really, or many of us were forced during this period to face ourselves. And it's very interesting because water is the element that's used in Tanakh to purify. And it's not surprising. Water is the primordial substance. You have it on your sheets at the third, I skipped the source, okay. You have it on your sheets, the third source, when it talks about the creation of the world, right? We sometimes imagine that before there was creation, it was a vacuum, right? We sort of say, there was creation ex nihilo, creation from nothing. But if we look at the sources, it says, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, God creates the world. What existed before? V'haaretz hayta tohu vavohu. Right? There was just this sort of unformed potential, the choshech al pnei tehom, and then what existed already? The ruach elokim mirachefet al pnei hamayim. The ruach, the sort of spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And so water in Tanakh is the ultimate, it's the primordial substance. It's the element that existed prior to everything. It was what was there before the universe took shape. And so it symbolizes really the whole of potentiality. If water was there before creation, then all potential inheres in water. A famous psychoanalyst, and Rachel, you can weigh in on this after, your thoughts on this. Carl Jung talks about the idea of being engulfed by waters as symbolizing the return to the womb or the desire to return to the womb, which really means facing ourselves, our innermost selves. The selves that we were when we were still raw potential, before creation of us, right? Before life essentially got in the way, before we were impacted and formed by all of those things around us. And so Carl Jung talks about how water for that reason can be terrifying, right? To sort of face ourselves. But it's also, for the same reason, why immersion in water is what enables rebirth. Because in order to be reborn, we need to face, right, that sort of raw, unformed potential. And we see this throughout Tanakh. We see water functioning in this manner all over the place. And we have it, the most obvious example really, right, is the case of the flood, where the world has to start anew. And so waters engulf the world, and then the world is reborn. There's a new creation, but it has to be engulfed with those waters. It has to resort to that primordial chaos before that rebirth can happen. When Bnei Israel are leaving Mitzrayim, and we're about to be born, essentially as a nation, into a new national being altogether, we don't just leave Mitzrayim, we walk b'toch hayam b'yabasha, right? We have to walk into the water. We face our enemies, we face ourselves, and that experience, not just of Kriyat Yam Suf, but of getting into the water, is what enabled them to emerge as a new people. I think maybe the best example, am I running out of time? I have a minute. I think the best example really of this really psychological process is the story of Yonah, right? Yonah was running away from his calling. Yonah resisted who he was. And he had to have that experience of being completely engulfed, of being swallowed up by the sea, or in his case specifically, the sea monster, right, as symbolized by the whale, to reconnect with those pieces of himself that he had lost sight of. So I think that quarantine has forced all of us into a place where, to greater and lesser degrees, we've had to face ourselves. The volume, right? It doesn't mean that we're not concentrating and focusing on everything else that's going on around us. Of course we are. It's impossible nowadays to disconnect. But the volume, that the background noise that's normally turned up so high has been lowered, and the frenetic pace that normally keeps us distracted has slowed. So like Yonah, in normal life, we run to Tarshish, right? We escape into that frenetic pace. Corona, the waters, or for some people, the storm really has caught up with us, and we've gone into our tevas, and we've had to face ourselves, and we've had time to think about who we are and what we want to look like when we emerge. And I think that's ultimately really what immersion in the mikveh is meant to evoke. In the water, we're stripped down, right? We let go of our defenses, and for that moment, we just float in the silence as we truly are. And I think that water allows for that process if we allow it to, right? If we sort of experience the water in the way that we can, it can really be transformative in a lot of ways. Humans are, I'll wrap up with this thought. I think that humans are all about muscle memory, right? When we're teaching kids to walk, so we hold their hands up and they learn how to use their muscles. And then when we let go, we hope that the muscle memory or the experience of that feeling is what enables them to do it on their own. Same thing, we hold a bike, right, from the back. Everyone in quarantine is learning how to ride bikes. So we hold the bike from the back and the child learns what it feels like to balance on those two wheels. And essentially what we do when we're teaching muscles how to function is we're simulating the experience with them so that they know how to do it and recreate that experience on their own. I think our brains are muscles too, big muscles. And I think Corona, in a lot of ways, and the experience of this entire bizarre reality that we find ourselves in, has simulated aspects of the Tumah and Taharat process, and particularly of Taharat Hamishpacha, that we might not have been able to tap into before. And so I think that if we can hold on to, on the one hand, our awareness of our place within the whole and how profoundly our choices impact those around us, even if, or specifically if, we don't realize how those choices are going to ripple. And at the same time, also embrace the ability we have to confront ourselves, to touch base with who we really are. And then hopefully when the masks come off, literally and figuratively, right? Then we'll be able to connect to these added dimensions of Taharat Hamishpacha. And if we could, again, sort of have that muscle memory and draw from the experiences of this crazy period, then I hope in a lot of ways Taharat Hamishpacha can become that much more meaningful for people as they embark on their own journeys. So thanks for listening.
Thank you so much. Wow. I feel like you somehow packed in like so many different ideas. I feel like that must have been an hour, but it actually wasn't. So kudos to you. Our next speaker is Even-chen, who is an informal Jewish educator and Kala teacher for over 20 years. She specializes in teaching non-observant kalot and also is one of the coordinators of this program. So if you feel like writing a thank you note, include her in your thank you note. And Chana will be speaking about making the familiar new, how teaching non-religious brides impacts my mikveh connection. Take it away.
Okay, hi. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Naomi, for this opportunity. I'm really honored to be part of this program and to join the conversation. When I started teaching kalot, my daughter was in Gan. She was around 4 years old. And on a day that I had a kala coming, I would always try to get the kids in bed at a reasonable hour so that I would have space and quiet for the teaching that I needed to do in the house. And my daughter always objected every time, Ima, I want to stay awake and meet the kala. I need to see the kala. I need to see the kala. So one time I said to her, why is it so important to you to meet the Kala? And she said, oh, Ima, I need to see her beautiful dress. So needless to say, when I explained to her that the Kala was coming to my house in jeans and a t-shirt and not in her wedding dress, it was much easier to get her to bed on time. But the truth is that even if a Kala is not coming in her actual wedding dress when I meet with her, it is certainly true that a Kala comes with a certain aura. She has a very special energy about her. This time in her life is very special and exciting leading up to her wedding. So I want to give a little bit of background about what I do. In Israel, anyone getting married through the Rabbanut is required to meet with a madricha and learn Taharat Hamishpacha and about Mikveh, and is also required to go to the Mikveh and immerse in the Mikveh before her wedding. So I teach kalot from a lot of different backgrounds. Some of them identify as observant. Most of the women that I meet actually do identify as traditional or secular. Some of them will meet with me multiple times. Most of them come and meet with one meeting that they're required to do. Some come with the intention of going to the mikveh just that one time, and others come with the intention of Taharat Hamishpacha being part of their married lifestyle. And with all these variations and differences, one of the first things that I learned in this process was that whether a woman identifies herself as observant, traditional, secular, it really doesn't automatically mean any one thing about her inner experience. She might be really looking forward to learning about these traditions, whether or not she has background in it, and she might be resentful of it, whether it's the expectation put upon her by the system or the expectation from her family and society. She might have some knowledge about Taharat Hamishpacha and Mikveh, and it might already inspire her, or she might find it a turnoff, or she might come with absolutely no background in Taharat Hamishpacha. When we start learning together, the ideas might inspire her, they might connect with her, or they might trigger a lot of struggles. Will she be open and tell me how she's feeling as we learn, or will she keep it inside and not tell me where it's meeting her and how she experiences it? I realized that the answer to all those questions was unique to each and every woman, regardless of what her form said under the category of how do you identify religiously. So here I am, a virtual stranger, and I'm about to sit down and discuss some very personal things with this woman. If Hadrachat Kala is not a good example of TMI, then I don't know what is. And how can I make this a meaningful experience? How can I be a positive part of this really intense stage of her life? And how can I make it personal to her and to her worldview? And then, as if that's not enough, what about my own doubts and my own struggles in regards to Taharat Hamishpacha and Mikveh? I am committed to the tradition, and I do find a lot of beauty and meaning in it. And alongside of that, I also struggle with certain concepts and have challenges. So what do I do with my doubts while I'm teaching? So it's a lot of responsibility coming at me from a lot of angles. So there's a really beautiful idea that I heard from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs about responsibility. He says responsibility is response ability, our ability and obligation to respond to situations that arise proactively, to take challenges and face them proactively, right? To respond actively. So it was really important to me to connect personally with each kala, to understand where she's coming from, not to have any sort of one-size-fits-all style of teaching Taharat Hamishpacha, but to try to give her as an individual the best I could, as much as I can, to help her to help prepare her for all the upcoming stages. There's so many layers and topics in Taharat Hamishpacha and in Mikveh that we could discuss, and I'm going to focus on a couple that came from a particularly personal part of my journey as a madrichat kalot. So first I want to talk about the pressure that's sometimes associated with going to the mikveh. As in, will I feel the right thing when I go to the mikveh? Will I be able to create the spiritual experience that I am supposed to? Will I feel uplifted? Am I supposed to feel reborn? And what if I don't? what happens then? I know that sometimes I feel pressure, even after going to the mikveh for many years. And I know that a kala who has never done this before is likely to have some expectations from herself, from the experience. So I think that what's important is that I notice my thoughts. I think it's important that I listen to that inner voice and what my gut is saying about going to mikveh. Am I feeling anticipation? Am I feeling hesitation? Am I excited? What am I hearing from myself? I think it's important that I listen to that I take note of that inner voice and acknowledge it and accept it. And that voice may develop and change over time. And then it may change again. It's not one voice that always says the same thing. And I think I need to be open to hearing what I'm saying to myself about mikveh. And the result of accepting that inner voice, rather than struggling against it, is that I learned to give myself permission. Permission to not have a spiritually uplifting experience at the mikveh. Permission to not feel guilty or inadequate. To realize that a woman who immerses and feels reborn, and a woman who immerses and doesn't really feel anything, are both tahor and have both had equally kosher immersions. And I think that's really important to hold on to. But on the other hand, I also want to give myself the opposite permission. I want to give myself permission to have an spiritually uplifting experience. I don't want to rule out the possibility that I might be emotionally or spiritually touched by the experience of going to the mikveh. Maybe this time, maybe next time, maybe a different time. I think the permission goes both ways. I don't want to box myself out of an experience any more than I want to box myself into it. And I really try to impart this to the kala in hopes that she'll be able to give herself permission to embrace all sorts of different experiences and at different times, and that she'll feel equally confident in the different experiences that she might have, and that she will be able to hear her inner voice as she goes through the process. Another topic I wanted to focus on is that actual moment of immersion in the water, right? Maybe the first one of permission is a little more broad. It's about how we relate to the overall experience of mikveh. And now I want to talk about something specific when we're actually there, that moment of immersion in the water. I've been going to the mikveh regularly for many years, and it's very familiar to me, but it still sometimes feels awkward and uncomfortable. There can be a sense of vulnerability, and there's really no parallel to what we do at the mikveh in any other context in our social world. It's not like going to the pool. And also I need to remove clothing, jewelry, makeup, all the things that are external. And some people might find that freeing to be unencumbered by externalities. And I think also it can feel impersonal. You can feel like your identity is being taken away from you and give you almost a sense of anonymity in that moment. So for myself, I really wanted to find a way to personalize that specific moment of the actual immersion in the water. I found, and I have a personal ritual that does help me, and I share it with the kalot. I'll describe it. I like to imagine that when I actually immerse in the water, every time that I go underwater, that I submerge, that I'm creating a kind of special spiritual energy. That with each immersion, I'm creating this positive, strengthening energy, and that it's my privilege as the creator of that energy to dedicate it, to send it somewhere. Almost as if I get 3 wishes, and that I can direct that energy to where I feel it might be needed. So sometimes it might be something national. Sometimes it could be something universal. It could be something within my relationship with my husband. It could be something that one of my children is struggling with. It could be a friend that I think is struggling with something, or just something in myself that I want to send some energy to and some strength to. So with each dunk in the water, I actually feel like I mentally dedicate the energy that I'm creating to a destination. This helped me because it helped me take ownership over that moment of immersion in the water. It made me feel that it was a personal moment, that it was my moment, and it took away that feeling of anonymity for me. It also helped with that feeling of awkwardness because it gave me something to focus on mentally. during that whole process. And I'm really happy when I can share this with the Kala, when I can tell her about this personal ritual. I don't expect her to do this exact same thing, though, you know, she is more than welcome to if it speaks to her. But that's not, the point is not for her to do this exact thing. The idea is that, and my hope and intention is that if I can give this real life example of how I took a moment of challenge and personalized it, that she will be able to then do the same for whatever moments challenge her, and whatever parts of the tradition she finds challenging, that she'll find a way to personalize it and take ownership over it. So if we go back to the story of my daughter at the beginning, then what was actually happening in that story? So what was happening is that she was making assumptions based on preconceived notions, right? She heard the word kala, and to her that automatically meant a certain thing in terms of the clothing that she would see. And sometimes, or perhaps even often, I think we hear the word mikveh and we make assumptions about what it will be like or what we should feel like, or we peg ourselves into a specific attitude vis-a-vis the mikveh experience. It can happen to a kala before her first mikveh experience. And as I explained, for some of the women that I meet with, the plan is for that to be their only mikveh experience, though, you know, I never know where life will take them. And I know it can happen to those of us who go repeatedly to the mikveh. So just as I think it's really important that there be no judgment and no pressure regarding the inner voice and the experience of the kalot that I teach, no matter what their background is, I think there's also no place for judging myself when it comes to that inner voice about mikveh. When I immerse in the mikveh, I'm connecting to a really ancient tradition, something that's been done for generations and generations. And it's also a moment that I immerse that's a brand new moment. This moment, this exact moment has never existed before. This person in this place at this time is unique to that moment. And I'm therefore creating something new and adding a new energy to the tradition. And most importantly, that means that every mikveh experience is really one of a kind and can be new every time. So that's what I have to share right now, just because we do have this, we have so much to cover this evening and so many amazing voices to hear. I really enjoyed sharing these thoughts and ideas with you. I think it's a real big honor to be part of this conversation. And I hope that this has provided some positive food for thought about the really important and deep topic of mikveh. And again, I thank Naomi for this opportunity to contribute to this.
Thank you so much, Chana. And what really jumped out at me was very often with mikveh, there's a lot of black and white thinking about the experiences. And I really sense from you that sense of having that grayness, that it doesn't have to be one or the other, and having that openness over time. So thank you so much for that. Our next speaker is Nechama Goldman-Barish. Nechama Goldman-Barish studies and teaches rabbinic texts. She is currently writing a book on gender and halacha. Nechama will be speaking with us about proximity to holiness requires utmost caution, understanding Tumah and Tahara. Thank you.
Are women's bodies sources of defilement? For the modern woman, menstruation and birth are beautiful affirmations of the normal workings of the female body. How can the Torah define them as unclean or defiling or polluting? Choose your translation for Tumah. For this reason, I often like to invite men and women to join me in learning the verses in the book of Leviticus that are of relevance, because the woman who experiences uterine bleeding appears in two distinct places in the biblical text. The broad topic of Tumah and Tara, which I'm not going to translate, appear in the first half of Leviticus in a section that is exclusively concerned with the offering of sacrifices and the boundaries of entry into the sanctum of the tabernacle and later the temple. The nation of Israel in its entirety, man, woman, child, priest, Levite, Israelite, will spend their lives until the second temple is destroyed, being aware of the limitations presented by their physical human bodies. These limitations mandate distance from God's presence, specifically in the temple. Nonetheless, people experiencing Tumah will be obligated in the many other mitzvot, commandments that define a covenantal relationship outside of that space. There is no shame or transgression in being tameh. It is a consequence of our human condition, a condition desired by God in his creation of human beings, male and female. I believe that the Torah places the birthing woman as the first example deliberately out of order in order to preempt negative association with Tumah. After all, birth is one of the most desirable and elevated experiences of the human condition. If we advance the rabbinic idea that man, woman, and God all participate in conception of a child, the act itself in which man and woman become tameh through contact with the man's seed, then this cycle of Tumah and Tahara is actually the only way in which God's presence in the world can be perpetuated. Furthermore, at the moment of birth, when a couple most feels the presence of the divine in their lives, especially if both mother and child survive, the woman, though blameless, becomes tameh. Although she may want to bring thanksgiving offerings, she must wait. Discipline is a hallmark of our relationship with God in general, and most specifically in the world of the temple. The reason for this lengthy explanation is that, as mentioned in the beginning, some women recoil from the language of Tumah. It is important to learn these chapters and note that men and women's bodies are equally subject to these laws, and it is not about a permanent inborn defilement or uncleanliness. Tumah and Tahara act like a yin and yang in balancing our physical bodies with our spiritual selves throughout our lives. The ritually tameh state is transitional. The body from birth onward will cyclically be exposed to states of Tumah. It is part of the human condition and thus part and parcel of our ability to encounter the divine presence in the temple. But proximity to the divine requires utmost caution. Uterine blood appears again in two different citations in chapters 18 and 20 that determine and define its relevance in contemporary practice today. Chapter 18 opens with far more authoritarian language than seen previously in Leviticus. My rules alone shall you observe, and faithfully follow my laws. I, the Lord, am your God. You shall keep my laws and my rules, by the pursuit of which man shall live. I am the Lord. Following this introduction are a list of sexual prohibitions. These include adultery, incest, sexual relationships with in-laws or step-parents, and bestiality. These laws seem to be the introduction to the paradigm of holiness or kedusha in the next chapter, in which God commands kadoshim tihiyu, you shall be holy, because I, God, am holy. These laws are not only for a select few, but for everyone. In imitating God's holiness, we make holiness our behavioral ideal. Striving for holiness, in contrast to the involuntary cycle precipitated by physical tumah, will require a daily struggle in the here and now as an act of partnership between human beings and God. How to achieve holiness will involve a series of ethical laws, including honoring one's parents, respecting the elderly, justice for the stranger, along with multiple separations between the permitted and prohibited, and understanding the distinctions between the sacred and the profane. In chapters 18 to 20, we not only find fundamentally prohibited relationships, we also encounter a permitted sexual relationship that has enforced sexual boundaries. The nida is not a fundamentally prohibited sexual relationship. Only when she is tameh is she prohibited. When she is tahor, she is permitted. Sexual boundaries are necessary even within sanctioned relationships. The nida serves as the bridge between the two distinct worlds of tahara and kedusha. And these boundaries equally affect men and women, even though it is uterine blood that serves as the source for structuring the non-sexual space. These laws are often referred to as Taharat Hamishpacha, or family purity laws. This euphemism, which begins to appear in the 19th century, removes the uncomfortable concepts of tumah, blood, and sexuality from the terminology. Furthermore, the phrase implies that following these laws brings an unmitigated spiritual purity to the structure of the family that is being created when couples abide by these laws. The biblical text promises no rewards. In the Talmud, there is one Tana, Rabbi Meir, who asks why a man may not approach a woman who is nida. He answers that the reason a woman is prohibited to her husband for 7 days is so that he not become tired of her and lose interest or become disgusted by her, and that she be dear to him as under the chuppah. This source is reworked in Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb's famous book, A Hedge of Roses, and other more modern works, to put forth the perpetual honeymoon theory. Quote, abstinence during marriage is eroticizing, just as lack of sexual relations during the engagement period heightens the erotic intensity of the honeymoon, end of quote. Marital satisfaction and happiness are thus credited to the cyclical structure of sanctioned and forbidden sexuality, so that couples experience a renewal in desire thanks to the mandated period in which they are prohibited to touch. This sexual intensity will then spill over into all other areas of their marriage, guaranteeing marital happiness beyond the bedroom. The reality is far more complicated. For one, divorce, abuse, perversion, violence, and dysfunction are prevalent in Jewish marriages within religious and extremely religious communities. While the divorce statistics are lower than in the secular population, they are not negligible, and rabbinic courts are filled with tragic stories of unhappy marriages and sexual dysfunction. Mikveh attendants in all communities are trained to recognize signs of abuse so as to gently offer resources and help to afflicted women. The increase in religious sex therapists trained to work with rabbis and advise couples, even in the most sexually restricted communities, attest to the reluctant acknowledgement that the laws of family purity are not enough to keep men and women sexually satisfied. Couples who waited until marriage, believing that sexual paradise awaits them as a reward, are sometimes disillusioned when they discover that building a sexual relationship from the ground up takes work, patience, time, communication, and sometimes requires professional help. Religious couples who were sexually active, either together or separately before marriage, can find that shame and guilt over previous behavior stays in the shadows of their now sanctioned intimacy. Furthermore, the idea that we will start being good and will keep nida as we should once we are married requires a huge change and quite a bit of discipline if the couple has been regularly touching beforehand. Being realistic about goal setting is key to avoid a regular sense of failure when couples who thought it would get easier find that in fact it sometimes gets harder. Enough has been written about the great sensitivity necessary when teaching brides and grooms before their wedding, and many educational resources and training have been developed for those in the field, which is a welcome change. These laws often bring up all sorts of complicated feelings, especially for women. To look at nida laws only as a series of halachot is to deny the reality of the experience. Much of this is heightened by the transformation brought about by greater education of women, particularly in the areas of sexuality, fertility, and intimacy. I have developed an approach in which I use the halachic structure to encourage couples to have honest conversations about the impact these laws will have on developing healthy sexual and non-sexual space. This gives the couple permission to already begin thinking about their love languages and how they relate to one another and the strengths and weaknesses that the relationship has, and how each space might highlight such strengths or weaknesses. When we start to talk about the laws commonly known as harchakot, or distancing laws, I point out that this descriptor for the laws is particularly unhelpful and in fact can cause harm. The couple is not meant to be distant or alienated from one another. Rather, they are meant to be intimate, loving, and close without crossing into sexual behavior. How do you desexualize a sexual relationship? I recommend that the laws be framed in the context of creating a mindfulness towards this non-sexual time. This reinforces the idea that the couple is together choosing to create the space and are deliberately changing their regular interaction in order to do so. I also strongly encourage open conversation about what this non-sexual space is going to look like, and to be honest about non-halachic decisions that might be made when considering how the harchakot, which include lack of touch, separate beds, some separation when eating, and not passing for something like 11 to 13 days, are going to be observed. For instance, if a couple decides they need to touch in their relationship, I encourage them to acknowledge that this is a non-halachic decision, but that they are also in an aspirational relationship with God and with one another, and they need to honestly build boundaries that will allow them to meet the goals they are setting for this non-sexual time in their marriage. In a beautiful midrash in Shir HaShirim Rabbah, the man approaches the woman to initiate sexuality, and she tells him that she has seen red like the rose. Immediately he distances himself, not because there is a wall between them or a snake has bitten him, says the midrash. There is no danger in her menstrual blood, despite ancient blood taboos and fears. Rather, it is because the words of Torah are as soft as roses and nevertheless form a hedge around them. What I love about this is the hedge of roses, with the soft velvet petals along with the thorns that demand caution that make up the hedge around the couple together. There is no danger. There is no public involvement. There is only man and woman inside the hedge, a world unto themselves, as they choose together to take charge of their sexual life and infuse it with the divine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nechama, especially the way you really highlighted that intimacy, as we often say, intimacy is not sex, and sex does not automatically mean intimacy, and that there's various ways that a couple can be intimate with each other besides just engaging in sexual activity. So thank you for highlighting that in so many ways. Our next speaker is Danielle Renov. Danielle is known for sharing her voice and expertise about food through her handle called Peace, Love, and Carrots. Tonight, she's sharing her personal voice with us on Mikveh, and we'll be speaking about Mikveh as an act of emunah, faith, and belief. Thank you, Danielle. Take it away.
Oh, okay. Everybody, I'm Danielle. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you to Nechama for arranging this, and Rachel and everybody. Everybody was amazing. I wasn't really sure how I fit into all of this. I'm really not a mikveh expert. I'm just a mikveh goer, a mikveh attender. The first time 2 years ago I was asked to speak about mikveh, it was actually a very, very difficult speech for me to write. I really had to dig deep and really actually explore how I felt about the mikveh. It was something that I sort of got married and did and didn't really love and didn't really acknowledge that I didn't love going. And through really writing this speech, I really was able to fortify my connection to the mitzvah. And it's really been sort of a life-changing experience for me in the last two and a half to 3 years since I really had to write this speech. So I thought a lot about the mitzvah of the mikvah and going to the mikvah and what does it mean to me? What does it mean to Hashem? Why do I go to the mikvah? How does it impact that marriage? How can I connect to the mitzvah of mikvah? And as I began my search for connecting, I read, I thought, I wrote. I realized very early on that everything I was reading was a little bit fluffy. It was very hashkafic. It talked about the beauty in marriage. It talked about keeping your relationship fresh and interesting. It talked about, a very pure and holy way to bring children into this world. And it talked about the reward you got for keeping the mitzvah and the reward your family would get for living in a home where, the laws of family purity were kept and, held so sacredly. It was really hard to find actually any practical information on how a regular woman who goes to the mikveh actually deals with going to the mikveh. How does she practically overcome the challenges that present itself every month when we need to go to the mikveh? After, really thinking about this and letting it stew, I realized that all my thoughts on the mikveh experience were completely subjective. I only was able to think about the mikveh through my own lens because, due to different laws of modesty and sensitivity, it's really not a topic that nobody ever discussed. Outside of my college classes, it wasn't anything I discussed with my friends I don't have sisters, but with sister-in-laws. It wasn't something that came up on the park bench. How do you feel about going to the mikveh? Nobody spoke about it. And for the first time, I realized that maybe no one else felt how I feel. Maybe these negative feelings that I had about going to the mikveh, the process of getting there, maybe I was alone. Maybe I wasn't alone. Maybe everybody felt like me. But I literally had no idea because I had never spoken to anybody else about it. So the only natural next step for me, because I'm just a wild extrovert and, need to share everything that I feel, was to step out of my comfort zone because although I'm a sharer, sharing about a topic which is so, really shrouded in secrecy and modesty and sensitivity was really out of my comfort zone. I reached out and I put out a questionnaire to hundreds and hundreds of women to answer about the mikveh, questions that I had about the mikveh, and it was incredibly awkward. And I was shocked that every person that I sent the questionnaire to, which wasn't on a platform, it wasn't on a social media place, it was people that I knew personally, one-on-one in an email or WhatsApp form, every single person answered. Every single person was really happy to finally open up about their experience about going to the mikveh. These were the questions I asked, and I'm going to take a little pause in between each one so that you can sort of take a second to sort of think about what your answer would be. So the questions were, do you enjoy the mitzvah of going to the mikveh? What do you find difficult? How do you connect to the mitzvah of going to the mikveh? Do you find value in the mitzvah? And lastly, does going to the mikveh bring you closer to Hashem? So I answered all these questions myself before I got back any other answers because I really wanted to make sure that my thoughts were my own and unbiased. And once I received answers from so many women, Haredi women, American Yeshivish women, modern women, Sioni women, newly married women, unaffiliated women, veterans, mikveh goers, young grandmothers, Sephardi women, Ashkenazi women, I really tried to reach out to women from all walks of life. Across the board, the answers were more similar than different. Do you enjoy the mitzvah itself? No. What do you find difficult? These answers were all over the place and nobody's answers were the same. Everybody found difficulty in different area and different places, different parts of the bedikas, hefseks, harchakos, all different things. Do you like going to the mikveh? So this was very interesting. In America, yes. In Israel, it's fine, or it's okay, or where else should I go? I just do it. How do you connect to the mitzvah? Almost nobody answered. I don't know, it's hard. I just go. Do you find value in the mitzvah? So actually this one got really 50-50. Yes, I found value, and then they expanded into exactly how they found value. No, I don't find value. I do it because my mother did it. Does this mitzvah bring you closer to Hashem? So most of these answers were no. It doesn't, I don't get it. I don't understand it. It brings me closer to my husband. I understand that relationship. I don't necessarily know that it brings me closer to Hashem. And then there was a few women that, yes, it brings me closer to Hashem. I find, you know, the immersion in the water a very spiritual experience. It's a place where I daven. But overall, there was really no answer to that question. And my mind was blown. A mitzvah that almost every single woman partakes in their own way, on their own level, and not one woman, including myself, could come up with a genuine answer of how the performance of this mitzvah brings us closer to Hashem. I could not believe it. So how did I get to this point where I am today, where I stand here 3 years later, more connected to the mitzvah than I was 3 years ago when I first had to start thinking about this? How do we learn to love a mitzvah that's frankly just really, really hard and really sometimes unpleasant and uncomfortable? So that's the question that I'm basically going to try to answer for you. Before we can even try to feel closer to Hashem through that mitzvah of going to the mikvah, I think first it was important to identify what we were going through and where the difficulties and the obstacles were. So for me, it's broken down really simply. We become unclean, are identified as impure, boom, right away, psychological obstacle. Next, we have to deal with changing the sheets. We have to deal with all the harchakos, separating beds, no passing, no touching, no singing, no hugging, no sitting on the same bench, no sharing food, whatever level of harchakos you keep, boom, obstacle. Next, doing all of that stuff secretly so that people around you don't notice, boom, obstacle. Next up, bedikas, remembering to make them, boom, obstacle. Dealing with the discomfort that bedikas cause many women, boom, another obstacle. Uncertainty strikes, seek out guidance by showing someone something we'd really rather not show, huge obstacle. All of this culminates in the final obstacle, which is the Yom HaTfilah, the day you have to go to the mikveh, the day we must go and immerse ourselves in water to achieve this actual purification. That day is filled, it's one giant obstacle filled with millions of obstacles. When I began this journey exploring how to connect, I thought for sure, women who had older children would have an easier time connecting to the mikveh because it would be easier for them to get to the mikveh. In my mind, once a woman was past the childbearing, nursing stages of her life, Nisa would become routine. The harchakos would get easier. There would be a more steady cycle, a natural ebb and flow. She wouldn't have to deal with the awkward babysitter encounters because her husband was at work late or out of town when she needed to go to the mikveh. She wouldn't have to leave her child's parents' night early to go to the mikveh. And all around, it would just be easier for her to get out of the house and do what she needed to do. Then I spoke to women who have children a bit older than I am, who are in different stages of life, and their children are not yet married. They don't need babysitters anymore. So they can leave the house during bath time once in a while, but they have a whole other set of obstacles because with built-in babysitters also comes questions. Mommy, where are you going? Why is your hair wet? But it's Friday night. What do you mean you're going out for a walk? Wait, you got a manicure but didn't get nail polish? And these aren't the only categories of women. There's the newly married girls who told their mother-in-law they would come for Shabbos, and then all of a sudden, oops, they have to go to the mikveh Friday night. Now what? Now they're stuck at their in-laws and they have to go to the mikveh and they're mortified. You know, there's like the really young couples that are home with the baby and they're studying for finals and their baby hasn't slept all day and the husband has to go to work and she's studying for finals and they don't have a babysitter. And she doesn't want to call her mother and tell her mother she has to go to the mikveh tonight. And then there's the woman whose children are married. She's a young grandmother, and she's worried about whether she's going to run into her daughter or daughter-in-law at the mikveh. There's the categories that age isn't even related to. The times when you crave a hug or a pat on the back from the person you feel most connected to in this world, and you can't you can't receive anything for it. These times come at our most joyous times, like childbirth, and our most tragic times, like during loss. It's times when words can't do what a hug or a squeeze can accomplish, and these are all obstacles. These are real challenges that every woman that goes to the mikveh faces at some point or another in her mikveh going years, and unfortunately, there's no real way to get rid of these obstacles. These obstacles exist. So we have to find a way to overcome them and connect beyond, even with, like, not embrace the obstacles, but find a way to connect through the obstacles. The obstacles themselves look and feel different to every single woman, right? For some women, it's the day of the mikveh that's the hardest. For some women, it's the harchakos that weigh on them. For others, it's the bedika. We're all faced with challenges related to this mitzvah. No one prepares us for these. I wasn't prepared for these obstacles. They're not to be unexpected, or they are expected, and then you prepare for them and you adjust to them, and then all of a sudden, boom, new stage of life, brand new set of obstacles. So we don't really know what to do, and we don't really know that we're not alone. Our feelings, our anxiety, our frustration, annoyance, whatever emotions you're left with, leaves us little room to feel connected to other people. Even though you're not alone, nobody's talking about it. So you don't know. You don't know how to connect to the mitzvah because you can't even connect to another human being and relate to what you're going through. So how are we supposed to feel closer to Hashem through this mitzvah when we feel so alone, or when it feels so hard? How can we love something that at times feels like such a source of aggravation? How can I, someone who can't quote Rashis or Rambams or whatever, someone who truthfully doesn't remember half the sources her teachers and seminaries taught her, go to the mikvah as a regular woman, just like every one of you sitting in this room, and how can I get the most out of that mikvah experience? And how can I truly connect to Hashem through this huge, beautiful mitzvah? So all of this thinking and all of these questions made me sit down and really, really it took me a few months to really think about this and go to the mikveh every time and really work on it and come up with a plan. And I came up with two separate answers. Not really answers, not really solutions. These are just almost like troubleshooting tips to help you get through these obstacles and still have the energy to find a way to feel connected. So the first answer is the easy, simple answer, knowing that you're not alone. You're not alone doesn't take away the obstacles, but it takes away that feeling of, am I doing something wrong? Why is this so hard for me? Why does everybody else seem to do it? It takes away that element of guilt, or maybe a place in your mind where you could feel like a failure because you're not connecting. You're not alone. These obstacles, everybody deals with some of them in their own way at their own time, and you are not alone. We may perform the mitzvah privately, modestly, and quietly, but we are all united in one very simple fact. We all go to the mikveh. We all care about going to the mikveh, and we all do it time and time again, despite how difficult it may be. So my first solution, really idea more than solution, is to do whatever you can to make this process easier for you, which is really just, it is the simple answer. Pick one friend, pick one sister, pick a parent, pick anybody you can who's in your inner circle, somebody who you trust, somebody who you respect. Make a code word. This is my code word. On this day of the week, I say this word. Please don't ask me questions. Just come over. Just watch my children if I need. Just pick up the babysitter. Do whatever needs to be done. Help me out. And you use that code word, and I'll come help you out. Go out of your way to find a mikveh where you feel most comfortable. For some women, that's going to be the cleanest mikveh. For some women, that's going to be the closest mikveh. For some women, that's going to be the mikveh with the latest hours, or the mikveh that only takes appointments. Invest in yourself. Go out of the way, even if you have to drive a little farther, to find a mikveh that makes the process more comfortable for you. Another solution is really treat yourself that day. I actually heard this from a bunch of women that really felt better about the mitzvah. They only get pedicures the day after the mikveh. The night of the mikveh, they never cook dinner. They order dinner. That is dinner night in, whatever they want, no matter the cost. They do not make dinner. They order dinner for them and their family. Another person puts on a full face of makeup, meets her husband, they go out for a beautiful dinner, fancy dinner. They go to the city once a month, they have a beautiful dinner, and then they come home. Do whatever your treat is for you. You save that for the mikveh day. There are ways to make the practical part of going to the mikveh easier, maybe not simpler, but ways to lift the heavy burden that it can sometimes feel like. Take the time to really think about this and find what works for you. Hopefully, if the obstacles weigh less on us, we can actually take the time that day to focus on the mitzvah. That leads to our second answer. This is not the easy answer. This is the answer that I really had to dig deep for that ultimately worked for me. It might not be the answer that works for you. This is the spiritual answer that works for me and helps me connect to Hashem. Comes down to emunah, faith and belief. Emunah in Hashem and His Torah, of course, but it's more than that for me. It's faith in our history and faith in our heritage. Faith in the long line of holy women that each one of us comes from. Belief that my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and all the mothers before them that understood the beauty and significance of this mitzvah in such a deep and real way that here we are thousands of years later overcoming obstacles that look the same, that look different as them, to perform the same rituals they performed. The words they said, we said. The measures of purification they took, we take. Connect to Hashem by connecting to the rituals that our mothers have passed down to us from generation to generation, all the way from Sarah Imenu. We, all of us, women who have decided that for some reason we can't fully identify, but somewhere in our subconscious, we decided that this mitzvah is important enough for us to continue to put up with all these obstacles month after month. Have faith in your inner belief. Have faith in that little voice that pushes us to do this mitzvah. There's no peer pressure because no one will know if you don't go. There's no Rebbitzin calling you every month to check in. Are you going to the mikveh? There's nobody checking to see whether you fudge the results of your badika. Somehow, this huge mitzvah that has zero accountability from any outside source has its grip on us. Why? Because we believe. Because somewhere deep down, we believe that this mitzvah is important. Connect to Hashem by connecting to yourself. Something deep inside of you is pushing you to go every month. Is it fear of punishment? No, because if we don't go, we're not really the ones that are going to get punished. Amen. We go purely out of self-motivation. It's just buried so deep down and covered up by all the things and obstacles we have to do that it's so hard to access that belief. For me, thinking about the long line of women that came before us, that said the same words I say, that brought me into this world in the same holy way I bring my own children into this world, that overcame the obstacles they faced in their own generations, you know, most likely walked in their snow up to their knees with no shoes, dipped in frozen water, gives me chills. I feel the connection and cannot help but thank Hashem for the privilege to perform this mitzvah the way they all performed it. Mitzvahs are like relationships. All relationships, like mitzvahs, require work. But for some of them, the work comes more easily than it does for others. We work more readily to connect on our relationships with spouses, children, and friends, just like the mitzvahs of lighting Shabbos candles, saying Moda'ani, and Shema. Other relationships, like mitzvahs, require a lot more effort, like in-law relationships, a difficult teacher, a bad neighbor. These are relationships that you need to mindfully and intentionally invest in. Why? They're a part of your life and they always will be. How? The only way to improve any relationship and create any sort of connection is by looking inward and working on yourself. You will then be rewarded with a deeper connection. It's the same for the mikvah. It's the mother-in-law of all mitzvahs, literally and figuratively. Hear me out. Without it, we would not have the beautiful reason to go to the mikveh that we have, our husbands, but it's hard on us. It's awkward sometimes. It's not always comfortable. Sometimes could be a little bit difficult. However, ultimately, what we put in is what we will get out of it. So now, think about why are you going. Think about the women that came before you and what they went through to bring you into this world in the holiest possible way. Think about the fact that when you go to the mikveh, you're saying the same words and most likely davening the same tefillos as Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. Just like the women that came before us, we're davening for the same shalom bayis, health, parnasa, clarity in raising our children, and of course the Beis HaMikdash. We're so far removed from the holiness of these great women. But on the day of the tefillah, when you have gone through all the measures that the women before us took also, and you emerge purified from those waters, you're no different than Sarah Imenu. You have achieved the same level of purity that the Nashim Tzidkanios before you achieved. The world can change over thousands of years. We look different, the mikvahs look different, but the mitzvah of mikvah, that's constant. It's forever. And we are the link connecting the women of our past to the daughters of our future. So thank you. I want to really thank you for having me on here tonight, because every time I go through this and I go through these thoughts, it fortifies my own emunah, my own belief, and my own connection to the generations that came before us. We're the link in the chain. Us, it's here today. And when we go to the mikveh, every time we go, we're fortifying that link in the merit of all the beautiful women here and the amazing speakers before me and the amazing women speaking after me. I really hope that we should all be blessed with the continuity of many more pure, holy, healthy, and Taharatic generations. And we all be Zocha to Mashiach Tzidkenu b'mehera b'yameinu amen. Thank you so much for having me tonight.
Danielle, thank you so much for that. And what was really amazing is the same attention to detail that you bring to recipes and food. You were able to bring that same amazing attention to detail in talking about this mitzvah. So thank you so much for that. It was really, really amazing. Okay, our next speaker is Jody Waxpress. Jody is a couples and sex therapist who works in private practice. She's been a star panelist on Eden's recent series on intimacy in times of Corona. And Jody will be speaking about Mikveh as a transitional space. Take it away, Jody.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to move my screen so I don't see myself and I get to see you a little bit because you're more interesting to me. First of all, this is great to be coming on and speaking with all of you amazing people, all of the speakers and all of the listeners. And yeah, I'm going to be speaking a little bit about transition. So about 5 years ago, I had an earth-shattering experience. It wasn't so earth-shattering, actually. It was more wrist-shattering. I broke my wrist. I really don't recommend that to anyone who is a studying, working mother of 5. It's not really very, very helpful. But you may be wondering how I broke my wrist and actually why I'm even telling you this story. So one sunny Hanukkah vacation day, I decided that it would be a great idea to take my then 2 over 16-year-old children on a Segway tour of Tel Aviv. We had an amazing time until, in the last 2 minutes of the Segway tour, I very gently and eloquently and gracefully tapped my Segway onto a curb and very gracefully and gently smashed into the ground, wrist first. So that became quite the segue into the next 6 weeks that were very, very different for me, a very different type of existing. It wasn't fun at all. But what it did do is it taught me a lot about being adaptable and being vulnerable, and also about being courageous, especially when I had to use the public bus system. That wasn't so much fun. So according to the Webster Dictionary, the word segue, which is spelled for real, S-E-G-U-E, it means to make a transition without interruption from one activity, topic, scene, or part to another. So basically, segue is a graceful transition, a transition with no hitches, no hiccups. Personally, I don't do segue. I do more transition. Transition actually gives all of us a lot more permission, like Hannah was talking about. It gives us a lot more permission, a lot more understanding, and it's accepting of all the bumps and the curbs in the road. So as a Dati Leumi couples and sex therapist, the idea of transition comes up a lot. It's not always comfortable and can bring up a lot of stuff for couples. Transition, which sounds a lot like tradition, may make you break out into song, may make you think of Fiddler on the Roof and Tevye. And what I found really, really interesting is that in Fiddler on the Roof, which is one of the Jewish religion's most popular films, the concept of tradition and the idea of transition are basically inseparable. Throughout this film, we follow Tevye and Golda and all of their daughters and Yentl and Muttel and all of the community negotiate love and relationships. And love and relationships introduce excitement, wonder of wonders, miracle of miracles, and of course, the tension and vulnerability that consistently accompany the unknown. In the movie, as in real life, transitions create a sense of vulnerability and dis-ease. And some of the speakers that came before me talked about this vulnerability and dis-ease that we feel when we're working with the laws of Taharat Hamishpacha and the idea of going to the mikveh. So Joseph Stein, who is the playwright, he offers us, his audience, he offers us comfort. In these scenes of tremendous vulnerability and transition, he introduces musical numbers about tradition. I don't even think I have to say that word. I think we can all sing it together. You may notice that I use the word negotiate to describe how we handle transition. And that's because transition compels us to negotiate between the familiar and somewhat safe place where we are in the present, and our goal, the unknown and unpredictable but desired place that we actually want to get to. There's a tension in transition, and this tension is like a tightrope. If I was a little bit more technically savvy, I would have like a picture of a tightrope and someone balancing on it pop up on your screen. But this tightrope, right, it's anchored on either end. It's anchored in the security of the present on one end, and our dreams and our goals for our future on the other end. And the tension is what keeps us focused. If the tightrope is not taut, if it's not tense, it's going to be ineffective. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that tension can be good sometimes. Transition is the vulnerability we need to be in order to move forward. Let's think about what it means to be vulnerable. Most people associate vulnerability with weakness. In fact, when you try to translate the word vulnerability into Hebrew, you're going to hit a brick wall. And believe me, I've tried many, many times. I've asked a lot of people, and what people come up with are two different words. One word is chasuf or chasufa, right, to be exposed or to be exposed to. And the second word is pagia or pagia, which means to be susceptible. And while both of these words actually are accurate to a certain degree, they're still lacking. What they're lacking, I believe, and what Brene Brown, if anyone has heard of Brene Brown or heard her TED Talks or read any of her books, she brings up this idea of the beauty and the possibility that comes with vulnerability. And we, like the Lion and the Wizard of Oz, we have to be vulnerable in order to be courageous. We must be vulnerable to successfully transition from point A to point B. And that's sort of when I was listening to Yael talk about, I loved what she said about, vulnerability is being in the raw, unformed potential. I thought that was I was like, oh my gosh, write that down. This really, really connects. And Chana actually talked about listening to our inner voice, right? And giving ourselves permission to be in that vulnerability. So let's go for a second to tradition. Tradition is here to help us, like in the movie, with the discomforts that come with vulnerability. Mikveh is a place of transition. Thus, it's a place of vulnerability. We transition from one halachic status to another, like Nechama talked about, from one relational status to another. And this process of preparing for the mikveh, of submerging and emerging out of the water, that's also what cool words are being used here tonight. We're merging, right? We're either submerging or we're emerging into and out of the water. And that process gives us such an incredible opportunity to take time to appreciate being in the transition and not rushing through it, experiencing the process. We don't often have this opportunity in our day-to-day lives, right? When we're in our car, that's usually our transitional mode. We're running, from home to work, to pick up, to drop off, to the supermarket, to visits, right? When we're in these transitional spaces, our brains are busy with so many different things. And usually we're also on the phone and talking to this, right? We don't give ourselves time to actually be in transition. I actually find it really interesting because I miss being in the car now. I realize that when I'm in the car, with the lockdown, which is now starting to open up, all of a sudden I have some space to breathe because I have to stop what I'm doing and not just go on the next Zoom link, but I have to get in the car, turn the car on and take a few minutes and just relax. And I'm loving it. That's where I make all my good phone calls and do my good thinking. So the mikvah here is also an opportunity to stop and to breathe and to be in transition. Our tradition, our Masorah, our halachic guidelines, wait for it, they're our transitional space. There are transitional objects, Our transitional objects are, we can think about it in terms of being kids. A transitional object is like a blanket, a pacifier, a teddy bear, right? If we're thinking about in adult terms, we may be talking about taking your favorite pajamas to wear when you move out of your parents' home for the first time, or the Tehillim you were given as a bat mitzvah gift from your favorite teacher that you use as you walk down the aisle at your wedding. True story. It could be a special necklace or bracelet a loved one gives you to wear, hoping that you'll think of them when they're not around. True story. Think about your experiences with Taharat Hamishpacha and the monthly cycle of transitions that we as women are so familiar with it. We've been talking a lot about this tonight, and with your permission, I'd like to take us somewhere new. But first, we will have to take a deep breath together and allow ourselves to transition into a new space. This space is called relationality. It's a funny word, it's a real one, and it's actually used in therapy very often. You could check out Terry Real's RLT model. It's called Relational Life Therapy, and he uses this word a lot, and I really love it. I invite you to think about your relationships with yourself, with your spouse, your soon-to-be spouse. Some of you may be remembering your spouse or dreaming of the spouse you will, Bezrat Hashem, meet. And I'm speaking to all of you together as women. I invite you to think about your relationship with Judaism, with Taharat Hamishpacha, with Mikveh, with your bodies. Going to the Mikveh is one of Judaism's top traditions. We're guided by halacha and Masorah. Together, they hold our hands as we enter into this transitional space. In my work, I have the honor of meeting with many men and many women who share their feelings about Taharat Hamishpacha and Mikveh. The concepts of vulnerability, uncertainty, opportunity, courage, exposure, beauty, fear, anticipation, they all come up. Of course they do. Mikveh is a transitional space, and things come up in transitional spaces. Going home from the mikveh is a transition as well. What are our expectations? What are our husband's expectations? Do they line up? Have we taken the time to share our thoughts and our feelings as we transition from one relational status to another? We're tasked with attending to all of these things. And I loved how, Danielle, you just gave me the perfect segue into this when you spoke about this questionnaire that you put out, because we need to reach out. So many times we feel mikveh is secret. It's not, it's private. Private is very different than secret. We can ask in comfortable ways. We can ask people, we can get advice, we can get suggestions, we can gain comfort and belonging. We can reach out, sometimes we reach out to our spouse or a friend, a college teacher, a rav, yotzet halacha. Maybe you have a great relationship with the mikveh lady, the balanit, who's going to be speaking to us next, right? And maybe you need to speak to someone professionally. Maybe that's what you need. All of these things can be good. They can be okay. They're healthy and productive. It's no wonder that transition and tradition go hand in hand. I like to believe that tradition is Hashem's way of walking us through the changes we go through in our lives. Tradition is our transitional object. We can always count on tradition to be there to help stabilize us on that tightrope we so often walk, suspending us between where we are now and where we want to go. So the next time you think of coming up with a smooth segue into a new conversation, a new job, a new relationship, a new month, a new mindset, remember, segues are not always as seamless and graceful as they seem on TV. They're actually a lot more pointy, like the rooftops with shaky fiddlers. There are bumps and curves and falls and broken bones in real life. But if we listen closely and hold on tight to our traditions, we can hear the beautiful music of the fiddlers as we negotiate our transitions. Thank you. Have a good night, everybody, and enjoy Tal and Shani.
Thank you so much, Jody, for that. It was almost poetic, and it was really beautiful, and also just bringing into focus what it means to feel raw and vulnerable and the opportunities that arise with that. So we have two more speakers to go. So obviously we recognize some people might have to get off, but we just want to kind of keep you in the loop that we have two really great speakers still coming. We have Tal Basali and Shani Tarragon. So let's first hear from Tal. Tal's lived for 15 years in Venice, Italy. She's the mikveh attendant and a Kala teacher, and also a graduate of Eden Center's Advanced Kala Teacher Training Program. Tal will be speaking about where traditional and modern meet, balanit as a professional and personal role. Thanks, Tal.
It's really such an honor and a privilege to be with events. Are usually things that people from larger communities participate in, and I realize that I'm really on the outskirts. And I do want you to encourage you to participate and support in the amazing work that the Even-chen is doing. I've been involved for a few years now, and I did the color teachers course in Jerusalem, and it was the most remarkable experience. And really, there's such a broad breadth of women, different kinds of women who participate in the amazing work that they do. I really encourage you to get involved. I think I'm going to talk to you a little bit from really, really personal experience. What I actually do is I run a Jewish online school. It was something that we didn't have here, was high quality education. So I set up a Jewish online school a few years ago, and one of the themes that I work with are really the themes of how to build and retain Jewish identity. And it's something I'm very passionate about. So I moved here as a married woman about 15 years ago. It was my second marriage. I wasn't crazy about the mitzvah of Taharat and Hamishpacha before. I actually didn't find it enjoyable. I didn't connect to it at all. The second time around, I really enjoyed going and I really connected to it. And I really felt that it helped me to manage my time and my body and to set the mechanism, because I feel very strongly that Taharat Hamishpacha sets the mechanism for healthy boundaries to be put in place in a relationship. So I feel that it serves me very, very strongly. I'm a very highly modern and professional woman. And about 10 years ago, I was asked to take on the responsibility of the only mikveh in North Italy, which I really wasn't the smartest or the best woman for the job, but I was the youngest. And so, still one of the few people using the mikveh. And when I told my mother about this appointment, she said to me, "Who are you? I mean, what have you done with my daughter?" So that was it was very, very amusing. It was really not part of my destiny to be a mikveh lady or a color teacher or anything like that. But I came to live in Venice, and what happens when you live in a place like Venice, where there isn't that much Jewish life, where it's a very small Jewish community, all of a sudden you've gone very much down to basics. And I'm also living in a very new culture and a new environment, and I have to reset my whole base, right? I maybe apply halacha differently because I'm in a different set of circumstances, I'm in a different context. And the same happened for me very much with mikveh. So for me, mikveh's taught me a lot about being part of a modern family. It sets a blueprint for me. I plan around it. I plan my business trips around it. It's really helped me to prioritize my family, which to me is amazing in a crazy, noisy world. And that's on a very, very personal level. So what is it like to be in charge of the in my city? You can imagine that there are not so many local ladies who go, and I so therefore don't have the opportunity to influence them as much. But I do get hundreds of tourists every year, right? And when I came into the role, I really had to set a bar. I had to set a standard in my mikveh, and that was, it was challenging, but it also it's a tremendous and humbling privilege, and something that I wanted to do very, very carefully. So I had to think about the local ladies, some of whom I've taught as kalot, and I had to think about what happens to the tourists, what happens to their habits, right? What happens when people come to the mikveh. So I was determined to make, both for local ladies, for setting the habit and for getting it used to the mitzvah, but also for tourist ladies who come, when you go to the mikveh in a foreign place, you're terrified, you don't know what kind of conditions you're going to find, you don't know what kinds of balanit you're going to find. I'm always listening to the themes around the world. I know in Israel there are themes of women who want to go to the mikveh without a balanit. The people that feel that maybe the balaniot are too overbearing. I was really trying to think about what my habits would be, what my standards would be, something that would be good. And I want to tell you that I actually speak to every single woman before she visits my mikveh, because it's an appointment-only mikveh. So I explain everything to them, I describe what's available, I calm them down. You can imagine I get lots of brides, lots of honeymooners, right? I'm there first. They're never going to forget me. They're always going to remember me. So I'm so careful with that because I want it to be an excellent, excellent, excellent memory. So, I have different rules for the local ladies because I want to set them in habits, and I want them to grow in the mitzvah. I don't want it to just be something that they want to get over and done with. A lot of the ladies in Italy are converts. So they don't necessarily have the traditions of their mothers to back themselves on. And so that leaves a space for people to be able to create and personalize their own experiences, which I really, really encourage. It is the only mikveh in Venice. It is the only mikveh in Northern Italy. I still try to very, very hard to provide that very personalized standard. And I've been very fortunate that I've even been able to train local ladies to be balaniot to help me run the mikveh, especially in the summers when there's a lot of people. It's not always easy to be in charge of a mikveh. Our rabbi changes generally every 1 or 2 years. Our board, the council in Venice, changes about once every 4 years. That can be a very stressful time. Very often the board are not religious people. It takes time for a rabbi to figure out the context, especially if he's not culturally Italian and he comes from Israel. So I go through a lot of like stomach crunching moments sometimes, just trying to maintain a very sort of continuous service in the mikveh, maintain very stringent cleanliness standards, but also, you know, like I said, very different rules for the local ladies, and then for the tourists, I let them do whatever they want to do at home. So I don't insist on any kind of standards for them. They should tovel how they used to tovel, whatever they do at home, however many times they dunk, however many brachas or not, however many showers or not, or baths or not. I have no standards at all. And so I feel that that's very, very accepting of me and very, very accepting of the way we like to do things here. But I also think that it's really a great privilege to be able to create a local minhag and a local habits for people to learn and to grow in their mikveh experience. I want to encourage women to make the mitzvah really theirs forever, because I do, again, really, really strongly feel that it serves me personally. I also, just as a side note, just find it very curious that in these very, very challenging and difficult times, the men are not going to minyan, but women can go to the mikveh. And I consider that really a great gift in terms of just the rhythm and flow and the timing of our daily lives. That's the only thing that hasn't been interrupted in the coronavirus. And that gives me, I find that very comforting. So my message tonight is really, I would like to encourage all the ladies to try to personalize the mitzvah, to look for ways to make it yours. And I also strongly advise that when you're going towards such a beautiful mitzvah like mikveh, but any mitzvah, you try it on for size, you do it, you know, in the proper way, whatever that is. And once you've been in the full immersion of the mitzvah, then you're better able to decide how you feel about it, what to decide about it, and how you want to do it, right? I've seen so many beautiful minhagim, even in terms of like how many times women dunk. You know, I've seen women who dunk once and 3 times, 10 times, 20 times, one for each child. I must have seen 25 different minhagim. There are ways to personalize it, and I think that's a really, really good way to take on the mitzvah of mikveh. So all I want to share is I strongly feel that mikveh is very much aligned with being a modern woman and living a modern life, and I don't feel at all that it's a barrier, but it sort of sets healthy relationship boundaries that are the base for life to flourish when built on the right foundation. And mikveh should be a meaningful experience that nurtures you. And so that's, you know, with no title at all, but that's what makes me the most powerful mikveh lady in the north of Italy, but not really. It's like being the only chief rabbi in a city where there's no rabbis. And it was really my deep privilege to share my thoughts with you this evening. And I want to thank Noemi personally, and just give a shout out to my Kala Adina, who's in London, who had to put off her wedding because weddings were not allowed in London for the last 2 months. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Tal. Thank you for your very Zen backgrounds. I actually found it very, very relaxing. And it, you know, really was great hearing a perspective of a mikveh lady who's on the front lines, right? For many women who are considering whether they're, you know, what their mikveh attendance will look like. It also was a whole new conversation also for the women who, you know, the mikveh ladies. So thank you for bringing that perspective. Okay, and for our last speaker, we have Shani Tarragon. Shani is a renowned Torah scholar and speaker and the host of Eden's weekly Wisdom and Wellness for Women Parsha podcast. Shani will be speaking about 7 days and 7 weeks, Sefirot, B'dikot, and the day after. Take it away, Shani.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you, Merkaz Eden, and all of you for joining us here tonight to hear different voices. And once again, the Kvod HaAchsanya. I've been enjoying hearing the 6 other voices and looking forward to really building off of all of them and somehow connecting the voices as we take a look at the development of the countings. For we know that we're in the midst of counting. We're in the midst of the counting of Sfirat HaOmer. We're in the midst of counting from Pesach to Shavuot. And as we count, we're reminded of all other countings. But we also have just finished Sefer Vayikra. And we're going to see something phenomenal. If you'll join me with some of the Mikorot, and if I can bother for shared screening here for a moment so that we can take a look at some of the sources in Sefer Vayikra and in fact get a sense of a different, okay, just trying to share for a minute, of different sources within the end of Sefer Vayikra, where we find that there are 3 types of countings. We know Sefer Vayikra begins, as Yael spoke about, with the understanding of this very ambiguous concept of Kedusha. What does it mean to develop an intense relationship with God? And the first 17 chapters, we really hear more about God telling us how to develop that relationship through the Mikdash. And as we continue within Sefer Vayikra, we're more or less empowered, or we become more independent, the more that we appreciate this amorphous concept that God teaches us through the 3-dimensional structure of the sanctuary, the more we become sensitive to what Kedusha is all about, so much so that not only do we hear about how we relate to animals that are defined as tamei or tahor, as Nechama explained, naturally limiting or allowing for a relationship with God in the Mikdash, but we also then hear about different physiological phenomena that also render a person tamei or tahor within this framework of Kedusha. And then we hear that there are certain types of physiological phenomena that we are going to have to be sensitive to ourselves. So much so that in the case of Vayikra chapter 15, we hear that the structure of the physiological forms of Tumah begin with the unnatural seminal emissions of a man who, after experiencing these emissions, must count v'safarlo shiv'at yamim. He has to count 7 days. This, as we know, is the basis for 7 clean days. Each one of the days reminding us of the 7 days of Briat HaOlam, restoring ourselves to a natural state with God, proving that we can go back to the Mikdash, go back to that natural routine of a relationship with Hashem. And then it's not just 7 days, but Yom Hashmini. He has to wait 1 more day before he can then bring his Korban Chatat and Korban Olah, before he can say, God, it hasn't really been my fault. I've just been experiencing this virus. But now I am going to restore a relationship through bringing a Korban Olam. And similarly, after we hear about the natural physiological phenomena, whether it be of the Shechvat Zera or the Nida, the naturally menstruant woman, we then hear about the case of a Zavah, V'isha ki azuv dama yamim rabim, a woman who has some type of unnatural bleeding. What does she have to do? The same thing as the Zav. She has to restore that natural cycle through doing the same thing. V'safra la shivat yamim. She has to count 7 clean days. And even that's not enough. She has to wait till the 8th day, bring her Korban Chatat, Korban Olah, and now she goes back to her natural relationship with God. But that's not the end of the counting. We hear in the second half of Sefer Vayikra, after we're told, Kedoshim tiyu ki kadosh ani, after we're told that we can make ourselves kadosh, God says, you know what? You're going to sanctify just as I do. You're going to sanctify Adam and Makom and Zman. And just at the beginning of Sefer Vayikra then, when we hear that we can sanctify ourselves, but only through going to the Mikdash, we can sanctify time based on when we bring certain sacrifices. We sanctify place based on going to a particular place. But now in the second half of Sefer Vayikra, a phenomenal revelation that God tells us, you can do this too. You can make yourselves kadosh through the choices of your behavior, whether it's through the way that you interact with your parents, whether it's through the way that you observe Shabbat, through the sensitivity to people's faces, v'hadarta pnei zaken, through not cutting the corners of your field or the corners of your faces. You make yourselves kadosh. And then we hear, don't just make yourselves kadosh, you can sanctify time. Usfartem lachem mimacharat haShabbat. We know these psukim, and maybe we even sing it in the backs of our minds as we introduce Sfirat HaOmer every night now. Usfartem lachem mimacharat haShabbat miyom haviachem et Omer hatnufa sheva Shabbatot mimoti yana. Notice at the second time in just the span of a few chapters that we hear of this imperative of counting. Is this time going to be the counting of weeks, not the counting of days that makes us kadosh, but counting not 7 days, 7 weeks. And these 7 weeks are going to bring us to a new reality, are going to take us from the beginning of the barley harvest through the fruition of the wheat harvest, are going to take us, as we know historically, from the time of Yetziat Mitzrayim to the time of Ma'amad Har Sinai. But that's not it. We just concluded, as you know, Chazak, Chazak, V'nit Chazek. We all screamed, perhaps on our street minyanim, but we screamed after hearing Parshiot Bahar and Bechukotai, when God tells us, okay, don't just sanctify your time, don't just take objective times like Shabbat, but take times wherein you see God as the God of your history and the God of your nature, but also now you can sanctify place. Which place? Not just the Mikdash, not just the sanctuary, you can sanctify the entire land of Israel. You lease the land together with God. And notice the exact same terminology, V'safarta lacha, Sheva Shabtot Shanim, Sheva Shanim, Sheva Pa'amim. The same pattern that we find, counting 7 weeks, followed by the 8th day, so to speak, thereafter, the 50th day of Shavuot, and now counting 7 cycles of 7 years, 7 years of Shemitah. It's not just year 49, which is going to be a Shemitah year, but the year thereafter. That 8th year is going to be the year of Yovel. Particularly on Yom HaKippurim, you're going to be sensitive to the sanctification of place, wherein you recognize that you live in a place with God. You live in a land with God as you declare the land, a nachala of Hashem, and everything goes back to the original ownership. How remarkable this is, that in order to teach us how to be sensitive to not just time and place and person, but the sanctity of Kedushat Adam, Kedushat Hazman, and Kedushat HaMakom, the Torah enjoins us 3 times over, V'safarta, V'safra la, count for yourselves, Kedushat Adam, V'safartam lachem mimacharat haShabbat, established through counting what Kedushat Hazman, what sanctity of time is all about. And how are you going to establish sanctity of place? Through counting. The counting is our consciousness. Through counting, we become more sensitive to each one of these realms. But let's go back just for a moment, and we're going to see another phenomenal textual idea within the psukim themselves. Notice that the first time that we have sfira is v'safar lo, or v'safra la, the individual who counts the days, which, interestingly, then teaches us that we subjectify our time. So much so that there's a fascinating machloket rishonim between the Agudah and the Rambam and the Ramban. And the Agudah and the Shalah maintain, you know what? A woman should count her days the way that we count our weeks. We know that we stand up and we say, Hineni muchanim zuman l'kayem mitzvat taseh shel usfartem lechem mimacharat haShabbat. And similarly, we should really get up. A woman who's counting her 7 clean days, the truth is maybe this would help us keep track more of our 7 clean days, but we should get up and we should count. And this is Hayom Yom Echad Limei Levoni. This is the first day, says Agudah, of my 7 clean days. And he says, of course, because it's about being conscious. It's about being conscious of that time for myself. The Ramban explains, no, you're not going to make a bracha. You know why? Because counting in this case is subjective. You're not going to bless on a phenomenon that only relates to you. Every woman's 7 clean days are her 7 clean days, are her personal 7 clean days, are her own consciousness, day after day, waiting and anticipating, as Daniela spoke about the mikveh, waiting and anticipating for the establishment of a relationship, certainly with her spouse, but also with God. Also, as we go to the mikveh and we not only undergo that transition that Jody spoke about, but that reaffirmation that Yael spoke about, that's going to be the sfira. And it's a subjective sfira, which is why we don't say a bracha. But we do say a bracha when it comes to the next one. Usfartem lachem. Notice it begins with v'safra la. her, every individual. The next one is Usfartem Lachem. This is going to be something communal. This is national. You have a national trajectory from Pesach to Shavuot. You're all going to be counting this objective time. You're all going to develop a certain consciousness of Sfirat HaOmer, the counting of these days, not only objective, but collective as a people. And let's take a look at the last one. Not only do we develop Kedushat HaAdam on our own and Kedushat HaZman as a collective people, but how about Kedushat HaZman v'safarta lacha? Here Chazal teach us v'safarta lacha. That sounds a little like v'safra la, but no, lacha. There's going to be an overarching body called the Beit Din, and they're going to be in charge of counting years. You know why? Because it's hard enough to keep track of days. The joke that keeps going around during these coronavirus days, every day is the same day, right? It's Monday, Tuesday, oh, we lose track. Thank God for Shabbat, but also thank God for Yovel. We know that there are counting of days, there are counting of weeks, and there are counting of years. But we all know that years are very far off. Years, if it's so difficult for us to keep track of 7 days and then 7 weeks, Kal v'chomer 7 years, that there's going to be a body that takes the responsibility for you. They're going to keep track of the years. But you have to know that you're part of that collective whole as well, and know that you're absorbed. And you also have to know, even while you're counting your days and while you're counting your weeks, that there's a larger body of time. And we already see then through the development of these sources, not only how Sfira, which we're so involved in right now, and we as women get to continue to count. We get to count our days and we get to count our weeks. And in Eretz Yisrael, we get to count our years of Shemitah and our years of Yovel. We anticipate the day thereafter and the week thereafter and the year thereafter as the day and the week and the year that bring us closer to God. Whether it's the day that we get to be reunited with our spouses and with God in our own Mikdash Ma'at, whether it's the 8th day or the 8th week wherein we get to celebrate together the Mincha Chadasha, wherein we get to celebrate Zman Matan Toratenu, or whether it's the 8th year of celebrating Yovel. And the Rambam teaches us, he says, you know what, the Sfira of the 7 clean days, notice the terminology in the Mishnah. It says, Upamim tzricha liot bodeket b'shacharit ben hashmashot b'sha'a shehi overet l'shamish et beta. The b'dikot basically explains Maimonides are really an expression, as the Mishnah tells us, of our own consciousness, how we inspect ourselves. That inspecting is also in sensitivity, but not just any sensitivity. Notice when ideally we're supposed to check ourselves. During the 7 clean days, we check ourselves bein hashmashot, and a very interesting terminology that Chazal incorporate here, and I don't think that is by chance. B'sha'a shehi overet l'shamesh et beita. What do these words remind us of? Bein hashmashot, passing over. Oh my, they remind us of the beginnings of countings. They remind us of our first counting. They remind us of the beginning of our relationship with God in Mitzrayim. They remind us of Bein Hashmashot, of the sacrificial Paschal Lamb, and they remind us of a God over, of God literally passing over our homes. And therefore, it's not by chance that the Torah says, you're going to count your days, every woman in anticipation of her reunion through Mikveh. You're going to count them in the same way that you count the weeks of your reunion and your celebration of a national religious relationship with God. The Zohar tells us beautifully, Uvedomeli isha sheyotzeit mitumata, source number 4, Vekevan sheyatza misham ulahala v'safra la sheva yamim, afkan Yisrael ksheyatzu mitzrayim. When we left Mitzrayim, we also left that. We left our tum'ah and we sacrificed Pesach. And we were very careful and conscious of what we were doing. And just as we had to leave Mitzrayim, and we know 7 days later, we come to Yam Suf, we come to our own mikvah, and we re-experience rebirth, we also then recount. We have an opportunity monthly, or depending where we are in our various menstrual cycles and life cycles, we count 7 days until we can reestablish that chibur, that connection with our spouse, but ultimately that means that we get to be more sensitive to our relationship with God as well. We, on a monthly basis, re-experience Yetziat Mitzrayim through Ma'amad Har Sinai. And sure enough, the Zohar continues beautifully and explains, Amar Rabbi Chia, Usfartem lachem mimacharat haShabbat, miyom haviachem et omer hatnufa, ma perusho. Why do we have to count these 7 days? This is because for 7 days and 7 weeks, we're basically going to be achuz b'tum'ah, like Am Yisrael, who were in a state of tum'ah, just like every woman, just naturally, she's in a state of tum'ah, but then we perform a hefsek tahara. We actively transition into a different state, and then we count. We count, and we wait, and we are bodek. And the sfirot and the b'dikot are very much intertwined, because it really is about consciousness. It's about elevating ourselves. It's about examining ourselves from within. It's about taking these times, these days and weeks, as weeks of introspection. We need Shiva Yamin and we need Shiva Shabbatot. We need to remember Lizachot Lihitaher B'mayim. We need to remember that we have times of abstinence from God, but ultimately times wherein we can work on ourselves each time, each cycle, developing an even stronger relationship. Rabbi Natan explains Anna Rabbi Nachman's words of V'safrala. He says, isn't that interesting? No, halachically, V'safrala la'asma. A woman counts. A woman is considered credible. We know that, therefore, we're the ones responsible for counting, so we shouldn't really lose count. But we're the ones who determine V'safrala. The Balei Tosfot explain that from here we see that a woman is considered that the woman really does take control over establishing and changing her status. He says, but that's so similar to Usfartem Lachem. The days, the ways that we count the days are the same way that we count our weeks. Sometimes, as Aniela said, we just wish that we can go straight from being Anita. We wish that we can go straight to the mikvah, but we can't, because it's a process of going from a state of tum'ah, not just to a state of tahara, but to really be able to be unified with our spouses, with ayul basarachad, together with God. And therefore we need a hamtana. We need a time to wait. We need usfartem lachem. It's not just count for yourselves, it's count literally la'atzmachem, bishvilchem. It's for you. V'safra la. It's for you, each and every woman. It's for you, Am Yisrael, Sfirat HaOmer. We need this. This is really for your own good, not just to have some time off from your husband and to have some more time or more space on your mattress. No. It's much more than that. It's about having that opportunity to undergo introspection. And he says, it's not even so much anava, adraba, zehu gadlut gadol. This is an amazing opportunity, because it's not a counting that occurs passively. It's an active counting. In order to count and to make sure that we go through the 7 clean days, we're actively inspecting. The Sfira of the Shavuot of Sfira Omer are active ones. They begin with the harvesting of the barley. They're going to continue with the harvesting of the wheat. And every day we get up and we say something. We change the status quo. Al Yedei Ma'asav. Rav Eliyahu Dessler, in a very similar way, explains that it's specifically the number 7. We need 7 days, and we need 7 sfirot. We need 7 countings and the 7 weeks, because there has to be this development of the natural cycle. He says that's the reason why there are Shiva Nikiyim. Nikiyim Lagamre. It takes 7 days to reestablish that natural cycle. It takes 7 weeks for us to reestablish a cycle where we can live and should live, not just for the temporary ephemeral state, but for a long-term state with God. And this, explains Rav Dessler, is what Kedusha is. It's based on reaching a level of Tahara, but in order to get to a state of Kedusha, of a true intensive relationship with God, you first have to get to that state of Tahara. And therefore, it makes so much sense then that when we celebrate during these days, the days of Ma'amad Har Sinai, we're counting to those days of literally the establishment of a long-term national religious relationship with God. Chazal tell us in Masechet Ta'anit, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says the 2 happiest days of the year were Hamishpacha B'Av and Yom HaKippurim, based on the pasuk in Shir Hashirim. Come and see Melech Shlomo, B'Torah she'itra lo imo, b'yom chatunato u'b'yom simchat libo, on the day of his wedding, on the happiest day of his life. B'yom chatunato, what's the wedding day? What's that day that you go to the mikveh? Ze matan Torah. They're really the same. We wait and we anticipate and we're active. And I'd like to end by sharing with you an idea that I really just thought of today. And I want to thank Naomi for this opportunity, not just for us to hear the other 6 voices tonight, and not just to be able to share with you these voices, but even for us sometimes to hear our own voices. And sometimes we don't really reflect sufficiently. And whether it's, as Rachel said, this is the time to really take for ourselves to hear those voices, the time that we need in order to reflect upon ourselves, the time that we need to really establish what our relationships are, ben Adam la'atzmo, between us and ourselves, between us and our spouses and our family members, and between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So as we look at the very end, we notice then that if in fact our first counting was really a counting in Mitzrayim, God says, where does it start? Start counting. Start becoming a free people. Start developing your own autonomy. And that comes through counting. God says, I want you to start with counting, in fact, the days. But how are you going to do that? You're going to start counting the days within the context of a month. Oh my, this is exactly what we do every month. Again, every single month within the context of a lunar cycle, and so many different parallels between the women's menses and the cycle, both from anthropomorphical senses, again, through, again, various sociological phenomena, medical phenomena that we're familiar with. What does Hashem say? HaChodesh hazeh lachem. It's now your time. It's your hitzchashut. It's your renewal. Now you're going to start to count. You're going to develop counting of days. Starting from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, count 10 days. And then, as if you're not sufficiently trained, again, here's homeschooling for you, count 10 days and then count another 4 days. And that's when you're going to perform basically your hefsek Taharat. You're going to begin then the cycle of developing a relationship with God. And then we do. And then we count, interestingly, 7 days later, we go to the mikveh. 7 days later, we have Kriyat Yam Suf, and we're protected from our external enemy. We learned how to count 7 days, 10 days, 4 days, and then, as we know, right after the story of Yam Suf, we have another water story, as if God says, okay, I'm going to challenge you through counting and through water. And sure enough, after that, as if we finally got the message, we learn that water is going to come through also abiding by the commandments of God. It says, Vayachanu sham al hamayim. The people, and namely Am Yisrael, after experiencing the national redemption through the waters of Yam Suf, Vayachanu sham al hamayim. There were 12 springs of water parallel to the 12 tribes. It's not just about the collective, it's also about the individual. It's about the tribes, it's about their families. Vayachanu sham, and they're able to reach this oasis in the middle of the Midbar. But then there's another story that's going to require counting. And God says, okay, you learned how to count days. Now it's time for you as a people to count weeks. And what are you going to do? I'm going to give you man. And this is all pre-planned and pre-directed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm going to give you man. And you're going to count now 6 days until you get to day 7. Because on day 6, on a weekly basis, you're going to collect a double portion. And on day 7, you're not going to leave your homes. You know how to count days? Excellent. Now it's time to count weeks. And after we count weeks, and after we develop this sensitivity to time, we get to another water story. And God says, oh, come on. Again, the water is supposed to be at the end of your counting. That's what's supposed to renew you. That's what's supposed to rejuvenate you. And once again, we tested God, and God said, okay, this time go all the way to Har Chorev. All of you, the Ziknei Yisrael, the Beit Din, you're going to bring the waters from the same place where Am Yisrael will soon see that this is in fact the source of their Torah, the source of their existence. And then finally, right after that, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar, as a collective whole, we get to our next oasis. It's not an oasis of water, but it's an oasis of Torah. What we clearly see then is from the very beginnings of our relationship with God, God wants us to count. God wants us to be conscious. God wants us to do. God wants us to introspect. Those are sphirot, those are b'dikot. And on a national level, we have an opportunity of doing this within the realm of the sanctity of time. But on a personal level, we get to do this within the sanctity of person on a monthly basis. We not only get to count 7 days every month, but we get the day after. We also get those waters. And perhaps this is the perfect time as we count the weeks of Shavuot. And every night we say, Ribono Shel Olam, Atati bitanu l'spor svirata omer, kedei l'taharinu miklipotenu, to get rid of all those vices, to get rid of all those superficial layers that we have. And may in the zchut of svirata omer, may we be able to repair whatever has not yet been repaired. V'taher v'tkadesh b'kedusha shomala, u'letaken et nafshotenu v'ruchotenu v'nishmotenu, u'letaharenu v'lekdashenu b'kedushatcha ha'elyona. May we be zochet to say the same Yehi Ratzon every month as we count our 7 clean days. May we appreciate the voices of counting. May we be a little more conscious and sensitive to Kedushat HaAdam, Kedushat HaZman, and Kedushat HaMakom, and through this be able to truly celebrate not only this year, but not only next week, Zman Matan Toratenu, but to be able to experience that every month. Chag Sameach.
Thank you so much, Shani, for tying everything up so beautifully. And tonight we heard from so many voices, and what I think really emerged for me, at least, is our relationship to presence, right? Of from doing to being, what it means to think about the concept of absence, not just what do you miss, but what's missing. And then also the idea of transcendence and meaning and opportunities for meaning, and what it means to shift gears in so many areas of life. And transitions can be unsettling, but transitions are often part of life. We're always in transition, we're always processing, and everyone has their own individual process in how they relate to the world, how they relate to people around them, how they relate to God. And tonight's conversation really crystallized that very individual process that people feel and how these feelings can continue to shift over time. And so I would invite you to stay attuned to those feelings. I'm sure there was a lot to take in there, and I wouldn't be surprised if you continue to have more thoughts and feelings come up even as we sign off. But take those thoughts and feelings and use them to create more conversations. Like I said earlier, there might have been things here tonight that really hit home. There might have been topics that you'd like to hear more of. Feel free to stay in touch, connect, suggest these topics, because as a community, we have a choice with these conversations. We could be reactionary, or we could create these conversations from a proactive place. And when we create them from a proactive place, there's such an opportunity for coming together, for validation, for understanding that so many of the thoughts, feelings, and experiences that people have are shared by others, which was really established so beautifully tonight. So with that, thank you all so much for joining us, and we look forward to having continued conversations with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you everybody who spoke. It was very beautiful, and we look forward to more opportunities.